present on Star Wars cast and crew items. So I've been collecting this stuff for a very long time, and I've presented this before with Duncan Jenkins, who couldn't make it to Jedi-Con this year. This is my 5th Jedi-Con, so enjoy coming back here and talking about different collecting topics. So we'll just jump right in. Cast and crew items. The first question you might have is, what are these things? Like, what is it about? Well, really, these are gifts and items for purchase that are basically available only to members of the crew, people who worked on the Star Wars films, worked for the Lucas companies, people in the cast. So they're very limited. There are very few of these items available to collect, so that makes them extremely difficult to find. And also, there's very little documentation on these items. So one of the fun things about collecting these is that as you're discovering these and learning about them, you're finding things that no other collector really knows about in many cases. And sometimes these items are featured in behind-the-scenes footage. So if you look at a lot of the making-of specials and other things with Star Wars, you'll see that many of these cast and crew items are featured inside those. So here are some examples. We'll walk through a few. These are caps that are from all the movies. I mean, all through since A New Hope up to Clone Wars. There are many caps that they've given crew members. Also invitations, so things like crew screenings of the movies, parties such as wrap parties after they finish filming, or Halloween parties, Christmas parties. So we'll get into this a little later. I'll go through some examples of these, but they're very kind of wonderful Star Wars themed invitations. There are also a whole bunch of t-shirts. There actually are hundreds of t-shirts that have been offered to the crew. And if you think collecting Star Wars t-shirts is tough, I mean, just these are the toughest ones. Some of these are made in very limited numbers. And I'll go through the highlights of these across all the different films. And some of them are really clever, very funny kind of designs. And yearbooks. So Lucasfilm and ILM have done these yearbooks that kind of show every member of the company, little profile. They do it like a college or high school yearbook. And many of them are Star Wars themed, and I'll show you some examples. Like, for example, 2002, Lucasfilm showed the Yoda statue at one of their locations, and in other years they showed also in 2002, the ILM book had all of the ILM members on the cover dressed as clone troopers. So they were kind of theming it around Attack of the Clones. But many of them are Star Wars themes either on the cover or within. You'll see many pages where they have different cardboard cutouts of characters and other things of the Star Wars films that we're working on at the time. And then stationery, so all through the movies, all the different companies from the Star Wars Corporation to Black Falcon, which was a production company for Star Wars, different film logos like Revenge of the Jedi, Return of the Jedi, Empire Strikes Back. So these are also kind of fun to find. And then the Christmas cards, which are my favorite area of cast and crew collecting. They have some wonderful Star Wars themed Christmas cards. Many of them with Ralph McQuarrie art on them, really unique to just the employees. And so we'll go through some of these over the years. But let's start off with A New Hope. So for A New Hope, they didn't have a whole bunch of crew items planned. No one knew the success of Star Wars. So the early part, there really wasn't a whole culture around Star Wars crew items. So some of the early items include this button, and you'll notice it has the original Star Wars logo that's got that kind of pointy W design before they switched it to the more familiar logo that you see on the invitation. So this was the cast and crew screening of Star Wars on May 21st, 1977. And this is one of the really tougher crew items to find because they only made a couple hundred of these invitations, and it was only for people who worked on the film that got to see it in Beverly Hills. Another really kind of memorable kind of crew item from this era are these albums that George Lucas and Gary Kurtz gave to all of the crew members. So what they did is they had this album of black and white photos, many of them from press kit photos, and then they personalized each one. So this one's to Kathleen Freeborn, who worked on the kind of makeup and creatures, and they wrote out a little note and then both signed it. And so these albums are really, really tough to find. And each one is unique. Each one was personalized to that crew member. And you can tell, some of them have this Star Wars triangle logo on the cover pasted on. They have a sticker that has the Ralph McQuarrie artwork that says The Star Wars before they retitled the film. And actually, a number of early crew items you'll see it's called The Star Wars, before they dropped the in the title of Star Wars. Which is another interesting thing about collecting these things. You see the evolution of the various film titles and naming and logos that before the film was actually released. These lucite stars became kind of memorable from Steve Sansweet's book, Concept to Screen to Collectible. These were given to crew members for working on the film, and they were also used in benefit screenings of the movies, where they were given out as gifts for people who went to these charity benefits. And one thing that's not very well known about them is that there are actually different variations of them. There are some that are really tough to find, and then there's some that are unbelievably tough to find. So the ones on the right, you'll see the May the Force Be With You star, and then the Star Wars star, and they both have that text imprinted on the back of the star. On that version, you can find it. They appear on eBay every couple months. You can see these things. And these were available mostly at the charity screening. Some of the crew members got them. But the versions on the left are the ones that are really, really difficult to find. So the text is much more compressed. The printing is on the front of the star. And then there's a whole bunch of variations and sizes of the ones on the left. So you'll see the really advanced cast and crew collectors will try to find the ones on the left. And then it took me many years actually to find both of those stars. But anyway, these are all just really nice display pieces. And one of the things that a lot of crew collectors when they first start, they're one of the first things they're going after. Then the moving card. So when they were moving offices in Southern California, they had Ralph McQuarrie do this artwork, which is wonderful, with the Bantha and Sandcrawler and Landspeeder, and then showed all the different Lucas companies, from Lucasfilm, Star Wars Corporation, Chapter 2, Sprocket Systems, etc. All these companies that were owned by Lucas moved to a new address, and so they used this card to notify people about the move. And it's just very cleverly done. And years later, actually, when they moved offices from Skywalker Ranch to the Presidio, they did a similar themed card that was kind of a nod to this, design by Ralph McQuarrie. And the Christmas cards in the early years were all pretty much Ralph McQuarrie art, by and large. There were a couple exceptions, but they have a bunch of Star Wars themed Christmas settings, such as 3PO and R2 by the fireplace in a couple of scenes, or 3PO in a Santa costume and R2 with reindeer antlers. And that was actually featured as a Hasbro toy years later because it was so memorable, this Christmas card. And so the one on the upper right was only offered in Great Britain. It was a Christmas card for the Lucas companies filming in England. So many of these things, again, very, very difficult to find. But these are among my favorite items of cast and crew. It took me many, many years to put together all of the different Christmas cards. For Empire Strikes Back, they started to get much more creative. So Gary Kurtz, who produced the film, was really focused on how to make the experience great for a lot of the people working on the films, make it fun. And so they did things like, for people who wanted access to the sets, they made these intergalactic passports. And the way they worked, where each member of the cast and crew got one of these passports with a unique number printed on the front. And then they had various stamps of different sets that they had access to. And so they actually used this thing, presumably, to control access to the sets. One of the things I find fascinating about this early item, so this is from 1979. In this passport, you'll notice that Utapau is listed in there as a planet, which didn't exist in the Star Wars universe until the prequels, until Episode 3, we didn't really get a planet Utapau. So it had already been kind of a name of a planet in Lucas's mind way back then, and it wasn't until years later that it was actually used in the Star Wars universe. There are other things too, these coasters, the Square Empire logo coaster. You'll notice the Empire logo in that is an early design of it, because in the final Empire Strikes Back logo, the isn't printed vertically like that. And then an R2 coaster, and these are such memorable crew items that they've both been parodied to some extent years later. Cast and crew T-shirts also got really creative for Empire. So you have, for example, the lower left, an AT-AT walker, which is like a wind-up AT-AT walker that has kind of collapsed on itself that Industrial Light and Magic had created. In the upper left, you'll see the light bulb logo of Industrial Light and Magic, where they've replaced the magician that goes in the light bulb with a a probot with a hat and a cane. So one of the really clever designs though from Empire was this Darth Vader in a hot tub. So they had on the back of the shirt it says "The Empire lays back," and it shows Vader kind of just chilling out for Empire Strikes Back. There are also these alternate designs that they were playing around with. You'll see different things where they have like a tub or a pool, and and some of these make no sense actually. Like the dinosaur with a fork and knife just doesn't make sense. And then the other one, this one's even weirder. It's a robot staring at a skinny dipper in front of this pool. So they discarded those ideas and started to go with Vader, which seemed to work a hell of a lot better for Empire Strikes Back. Then for Christmas cards, they continued Ralph McQuarrie having him design all these Christmas cards. So Yoda as Santa is something that became such a classic that they actually also made a toy of that years later. They made actually a few toys of that over the last like 15 years. There are actually two versions of the Yoda as Santa card. The first one that had the blue and the white one. One of the white one turns out to be a little bit tougher to find, but they're both pretty tough. And then the following year, they did another Yoda as Santa. There they have a California Yoda license plate and Yoda kind of in the sleigh. And perhaps my favorite crew item of all time is this Empire Strikes Back parka full snowsuit that they issued for Finse, Norway. So when they filmed Empire Strikes Back on location, they issued these suits for every member of the crew that went on location. And each of these suits has a Vader in Flames patch that is crew only. They have their nameplate on it. It says Norwegian unit and it has a Star Wars patch on the shoulder. There's also a cap that has an embroidered Star Wars patch on it. And I found the first one of those I got was about 10 years ago, and I've from 3 different sources able to piece together the full outfit. It's actually very hard if you're really picky about it to get every part of the outfit, because there are boots that they issue to these people, 2 layers of socks, there are gloves, a cap, and very few people saved all the pieces of it. And there weren't that many people on location in Norway. And so for cast and crew collectors, this is usually the holy grail item that they're after. It's on the high end, the most expensive of the cast and crew items out there. They don't come up for sale very often. Say once every few years you'll see one of these up for sale. A lot of times they're sold privately. The item on the left is also very difficult from Empire, and also one of my favorites. It's the wrap party invitation for Empire Strikes Back. So after the filming concludes, they have a big party. In this case, they had it on the Dagobah set, and they invited everybody to go to the Dagobah set and celebrate completion of the film. What was interesting is the date of this wrap party, which is August 31st, is actually not after they finished wrapping Empire Strikes Back. They actually continued filming Empire Strikes Back well into September. They were so behind schedule that they actually had the wrap party well in advance of the actual completion of the principal photography. But yeah, these is like a long kind of a mylar invitation, and so very few of these are around because they're just kind of this odd shape, and it's not the easiest thing to kind of preserve and keep intact. So for Return of the Jedi, some of you may, or hopefully most of you know about Blue Harvest. And what is Blue Harvest? So Blue Harvest is actually a lot of things. It's an episode of the Ewoks cartoon. It's also the title of a Family Guy episode. It's part of a story arc in a Dark Horse series, Dark Times. But it was also the fake title for Return of the Jedi. So when they were filming Return of the Jedi in the United States, they wanted to make sure that they hid the film from the public. They didn't want the public to know they were making a Star Wars movie. So what they came up with was this idea of Blue Harvest as a film that was a horror movie being filmed in the United States, and the slogan was horror beyond imagination. So they made pretty much anything you would make for a film using this Blue Harvest logo. On the top is a placard that would go on the dashboard of a car so that you could get access to the set. The lower left is a luggage tag, so when they were shipping all the luggage for the crew, they would know who was part of the Blue Harvest film. ID badges even had Blue Harvest. What I always find funny about Blue Harvest is the logo. I've shown the Blue Harvest to people who don't even know Star Wars, and they go, "Oh, is that one of the Star Wars movies?" Because you can just tell from the logo it's a Star Wars movie. So I love that they tried to hide it, but then they did a Star Wars-esque logo, so it didn't really hide it. And it was pretty widely known at the time that they were using Blue Harvest, so the newspaper stories at the time of the filming actually talked about the name Blue Harvest being used by the crew, so they didn't do a very good job of disguising it. One of probably the prize pieces of Blue Harvest stuff is the cap. So recently found out from friends at Lucasfilm who went through some literature that they actually made exactly 400 of these caps. So they have records of how many how many patches they had made, how many they had added to the caps, and exactly 400 of them, which explains why these things don't come up for sale very often, because most of these have been lost. Many of them are kept by people who worked on the films, so they don't really get into circulation very often. And then these rain jackets are even more difficult to find. So I met on one of my trips to Northern California talking to people who worked on Return of the Jedi. These were made on location in Northern California because they expected when they were filming in the Redwoods that they would get lots of rain. They actually went during a time of year where there is lots of rain in that area. And by some miracle, when they filmed Return of the Jedi, they had this wonderful weather for the whole film. So they hardly even needed these raincoats for that whole filming. But they made these silkscreen raincoats on location by one of the local crew members that was only there for that film, for that part of those shots. And they had, the person who made it for the crew had made, also was telling us, they made pants rain. Those are really hard to find as well, but they hardly use them on location. They even had Blue Harvest stationery, letterhead, memo pads, so they went, every length they went to for any other film, they used the same Blue Harvest kind of imagery for, as if it was an official film title. And here's some other things. The patch, this is the same patches that were on the caps, and then Blue Harvest button too. I don't know why you issue a Blue Harvest button, because it would be for promoting the film, but since there was no Blue Harvest film, but they really went for it, and so these were also given to the crew members. Blue Harvest is so memorable that Lucasfilm has even parodied itself in making other Blue Harvest things. So on the left is the standard Blue Harvest t-shirt that they gave to the crew. And then on the top, you'll see another kind of Blue Harvest t-shirt in almost the same style. And that's the special edition Blue Harvest shirt. So when they went to go make the Star Wars special editions, they made a special edition version of that shirt. Then for episode 2, they did a Red Harvest shirt, which was The Horror Continues, and they wanted to kind of use the same Blue Harvest theme. And for episode 3, they made Green Harvest, and the green there stands for, it really represents money, because the slogan was profit beyond imagination. So even Lucasfilm has loved to parody this, and you'll see other kinds of Star Wars related things where they parody Blue Harvest. The last couple celebrations have had some Blue Harvest items as well. For Return of the Jedi, the original title, as most of you know, was Revenge of the Jedi, so a lot of in fact, the majority of the Revenge of the Jedi items that were ever made as collectibles were the crew items, because that was before they officially changed the title. So here are examples of the crew t-shirt in lots of different colors. They issued these shirts in maybe like 15 different colors, and so it's kind of fun to try to track down all versions of it. One of my favorites are these, a couple of these items. So the Revenge of the Jedi cap, the embroidered cap, there are a couple versions of that. In the behind the scenes footage, you sometimes see crew members wearing these caps. The one on the left is a sweatshirt that was for the creature shop. And so these are the people making all the kind of monsters, creatures in the films. And they took the ILM magician and kind of made him into this alien creature, and then have Revenge of the Jedi thrown on the front, which is one of the more kind of clever crew items they made. They also had lots of Revenge of the Jedi stationery. Again, they had thought they were going to issue the film under this title before they retitled it. Some of the harder to find items are these. So the one on the left is a plate that was issued only to department heads in the film. So this one this was Stuart Freeborn. So it was only like people of kind of that level that got these plates. And so the plates are not that widely known, and they're really difficult to find. The one on the right is a paperweight that they gave to crew members. They also issued it to some licensees and people working with on the products coming out for the film. As they switch the title to Return of the Jedi, you start to see other crew items coming out right before the film release. So some of these Ewok t-shirts actually have Return the Jedi printed on the back. And so they're the very late-breaking, kind of last-minute crew items. Also the invitations to the crew screenings. So there were a few different screenings in the United States at different locations like Northern California, in LA, and they have obviously the updated title, Return the Jedi. And these come in a kind of a nice display where they have like an open kind of fold out that holds the invitations in a larger kind of cover. And so I've seen a few variations of these invitations. As I've met crew members, they were invited to different screenings at different locations. Also this Yoda t-shirt, so the high pressure environment of making the Star Wars films. They made a joke of it about Yoda being in a straitjacket and being under intense pressure. And so that was one of kind of the internal jokes as they were making the film, and this one was issued under the Return of the Jedi logo. Then Droids and Ewoks, after the original trilogy was completed, Lucasfilm went to work on Droids and Ewoks cartoons. And for that, they made various t-shirts and items, such as this one. This is the Ewoks raising the flag like they're over Iwo Jima, and so it's the cartoon Ewoks in this case. For Droids, they did this sweatshirt and this hoodie using the Droids logo and obviously the cartoon version of R2 and 3PO. And also for Ewoks, they made also a crew t-shirt. Now for the Ewoks movies, the ones that in the United States were featured on TV, in Europe they got some theatrical distribution as well. There are a number of items that surfaced from that as well. So this is a cap from the on-location crew that worked on the Ewoks films. They also made, for the second Ewoks movie, they did these Ewoks 2 t-shirts in various colors that show the kind of Ewoks kind of in silhouette, kind of climbing up along a hillside. And the Droids and Ewoks theme actually started to kind of spread all over Lucasfilm for their holiday cards. So cartoon versions of Droids and Ewoks appear in the kind of mid-'80s in the Lucasfilm holiday cards. Some of these, again, had very different styles of artwork, and I think they tried different artists as well. These weren't all McCory by this point. But they continued this was like the strongest thing that kind of Lucasfilm was doing at the time, and so there's this big emphasis on Droids and Ewoks. Their 85 yearbook for the company had, obviously, Ewok in silhouette kind of on tiptoes using a camera, and so by mid-85, the company yearbook as well was Ewoks themed. So at this point, I wanted to kind of cover a little bit of why do people collect this stuff, a little bit of the how-to. So, I think one of the things when you talk to people who collect cast and crew items is that they love it because these are so hard to find. These are so challenging. There's only so many of them made. Very little is known about them. So that's just part of the fun. It's like as you discover new ones, you're finding novel things that, if you're the type of collector who's kind of seen it all, this is a great area to collect because you're constantly finding things that people don't really know about or there's very little documentation on. I mean, I just mentioned earlier that we just found out they made 400 Blue Harvest crew caps. I mean, that's a fact that we didn't know about till a couple of weeks ago. Very recent finding. You would think after all these years we'd know things like that. But we're learning all the time. And so I think for many collectors, that's the thrill of collecting this stuff. And there's some real creativity and cleverness in some of these products. I mean, if you look at some of those t-shirts we went through, a lot of them are just, really, really a lot of fun and, take the Star Wars kind of universe, but then have a lot more fun with it. And you'll see that as we go through the prequel items. So for the special editions, they had this awesome shirt. So basically, it's they take a quote from the New Yorker magazine. It says, "Star Wars, a film with comic book characters, an unbelievable story, no political or social commentary, lousy acting, preposterous dialogue, and a ridiculously simplistic morality. In other words, a bad movie." So this was a review of Star Wars in 1977, and so Lucasfilm decided to kind of have fun with it and say, Star Wars making marketing miracles. And so when they reissued Star Wars, they gave the crew members this shirt. I love this shirt because they were just so in your face about the New Yorker review. Also for special edition, they did a bunch of crew screenings. And starting with the special edition, you'll see for some of the other films, same thing. But at this point, there's so many people working on the films that they can't just, in the old days it would be like, London screening, US screening for the crew, and that was it. But by this point, they're having to do screenings in a bunch of places, and they have thousands of people that have worked on the film in some way. And so they actually had 12 different invites just for the special editions. And so trying to, and part of it's like there are 3 special edition movies. So there are, I believe, like there are 4 locations that they had, and so they used the different colors for the locations, and then had the 3 different films on, with their film logos for special editions. For Phantom Menace, they did a bunch of unique style crew items. This is a racing jacket. They had a Skywalker Ranch version of it. They also had a Lucasfilm version of it. And so it was, they tend to try to do a little, style, add a little bit of style to the different kind of product designs. This one is Fighting Gungan's hoodie. So they kind of made this, the idea here being that the Fighting Gungans to evoke an image of like a college team and some sports team. And so that was the idea there. Although, I don't know how many people are big fans of Gungans as a theme for a school, but at the time they thought it was a good idea. And the wrap party invite for episode 1. I love this one. They have they took a bunch of the applause figures and some of the 12-inch figures from Hasbro, and then they took the Chewbacca, and you can see kind of Lucas's face kind of thrown onto the Chewbacca, so that was when they invite people at the end of the filming of episode 1. The one on the right is a party at Lucasfilm, so they have an annual holiday party. And that year they chose to do these tarot cards, and some of the tarot cards weren't Star Wars themed. But the one Star Wars themed one was Queen Amidala holding a lightsaber and a crystal ball, which the theme of this event was a crystal ball. So that was the one Star Wars themed card in the set. There are some other cards in the set, but they just have different kind of tarot card kind of imagery. For Phantom Menace, these are probably my favorite kind of screening invites. They had these colorful shields to show all the different locations that you could go, as a crew member, go attend one of the screenings. So they had on the left is the overall invitation that was sent to everybody, and then depending on which screening you chose to go to, you got one of these other invitations. And so half of them were for adults and half are for children, so that employees could bring their kids to see some of these screenings. And so trying to piece a set like this is really, really rough, because most employees have maybe at most like a couple of these things, and so to find all 12 of them not an easy thing. They also, for some of the parties around the time of the Phantom Menace, they took kind of imagery from the Phantom Menace and then applied parodies of other films. So if you remember the film The Blair Witch Project, where one of the main characters in it does a kind of profile in the movie, is kind of got the camera pointed at her and she's talking into it and she's wearing this cap. And so that's what they're trying to do here with Jar Jar, do a Blair Witch Project parody. And then for episode 2, they did Halloween Party invite. That's, Jar Jar is kind of a poltergeist imagery, where they have, instead of their back, he says, Misa back, and so they're trying to do, again, another film parody. And you'll see in some of the later invites, other cases where they parodied films to do the Halloween party. For Phantom Menace, they also made Star Wars themed Christmas cards, such as the pod racers as carolers, Jar Jar sticking his tongue on a cold pipe, and then the pod racers as sleigh riding. And the one in the middle there is Queen Amidala Christmas Tree. It was actually a very obscure Christmas card. It was for Lucas Learning, which is a small division of Lucasfilm and the Lucas companies. So these cards are extremely tough to find, because all of the different Lucas companies at the time would issue different cards. Like you'd get one for LucasArts, one for Lucasfilm, Lucas Licensing would have a card, sometimes the online division of Lucasfilm had a card. And Lucas Learning was one of the smaller parts of the Lucas companies, and so you don't see that many cards from there. The Phantom Menace yearbook had a complete Star Wars theme throughout, because the year in 1999, the company was working primarily on that film. The cover of it shows different employees of the company in Star Wars outfits. So many of them were extras in the Phantom Menace, and so they used that on the front and back covers of it and all throughout the yearbook. So many of these are characters you could probably find on screen, but in kind of background shots in the movie. Another unique idea they had for Phantom Menace was to do these like merit badge style patches. So what they did was each of the units, so depending on if, like for example, in the upper left, Dennis Murin's unit had 4 different patches, and it was for major kind of scenes in the film that they were working on. So you can kind of figure out what these are. You know, for example, the yellow one in the bottom middle is like a pod race one. The one in the right, in the bottom is Jar Jar. JJB is Jar Jar Binks. So they all have like 3-letter, you know, kind of code names, and it's for all the different shots in the film, and then the different units got different colors. And these patch sets were sent to the crew, but a lot of them didn't get complete sets. So when I bought a few of these from people working on movies, many of them were missing various patches, so it actually took a few tries to get the full patch set together with all the pieces. Now for Attack of the Clones, they had some really interesting crew caps they introduced. So the one on the left is the kind of clone logo that you see in Attack of the Clones. And so they issued a bunch of kind of clone-themed stuff for crew members. We'll see an example in a later slide. The one on the right is for the R2 crew. The people that were working on the R2 units got these R2 caps. And the kind of the style, I've seen a number of R2 builders use that same kind of logo and style. I've seen, it's kind of a style of art you see in Australia. Like in many places they'll have like the different kind of fauna of Australia, like kangaroos and, you know, and so on. They'll have them in that kind of same outline kind of form. And so I think that's where they got the style for the R2 for the filming of you know, Episode 2. Attack of the Clones also had, you know, continued the tradition of Star Wars themed Christmas cards. Like the one in the upper right has Jango Fett, you know, using like a blaster that's a candy cane from a LucasArts card. The one on the left is, you know, another Yoda-themed Christmas card. And this is an example of one that's actually signed by George and his family. So there, if you collect these Christmas cards, you want to really go for tough. Try to find these signed by Lucas. And then there's some that are what are called auto-penned by Lucas, where they just kind of go through a machine and just have it like automatically signed the same way for everybody. And then there's some that are actually personally really signed by George Lucas and his family. It's sometimes tough to tell the difference, but some of the, you know, more senior members of Lucasfilm got these cards from George during those years. For Attack of the Clones, they also had some creative ideas for t-shirts. So, you know, one of my favorites is the Hello Kitty parody, where they took the creatures in the arena battle and they kind of did all like Hello Kitty type characters around them. And then in the bottom center, you'll see like a retro style shirt with like Obi-Wan and Anakin and Padme. And so they were kind of going back to that 70s style t-shirt. One in the upper right is a Clone Academy, so they had, again, more clone-themed t-shirts. And we'll get to a later slide, I'll show you another one along those lines. The art department had their own unique design. So by the time of Episode 2, and you'll see this in Episode 3, they let each department kind of design their own, you know, wear for that particular group. And so the art department had this more Imperial logo style, and very tough to get these pieces because the art department isn't a very large part of Lucasfilm, and so these were issued in such small numbers. I mean, there are other crew items that they make in the hundreds, like we saw earlier with the Blue Harvest cap, but then when you get to things like art department wear, you know, you're talking in the few dozens that are made for those folks. And then I mentioned, you know, the clone cap before. They also made these clone trooper t-shirts, and these were all unique. So it's actually impossible to collect all of these because they're all different numbers. They gave a unique number to each member of the crew, and you know, sometimes I've talked to crew members who thought this was a ploy to track when these things got sold on eBay and figure out which employees were selling their t-shirts. But I think they were just doing it for fun, where they issued unique serial numbers for each of the clone troopers. And there's like a men's and a women's version of the t-shirt too. They also continued, you know, they had the Fighting Gungans for Episode 1. For Episode 2, they did a kind of boxing-themed duel between Jango Fett and Obi-Wan, and they call it Rumble in the Rain, like, you know, those old, you know, boxing matches like Thrilla and Manila, and those kind of, you know, kind of very hyped up, you know, duels. And so they had this, you know, wonderful hoodie that they made for Episode 2. And episode 3 then introduced a whole bunch of new caps, very creative ones, like the flames, you know, around the Revenge of the Sith logo, to ones like you see the Emperor in the top middle for the creature crew, to various, kind of knit caps as well. There's actually like a couple dozen caps just for Revenge of the Sith. So that's where they really kind of let different departments design their own, and so you have quite a variety. For some of the crew members, they also made these Star Wars themed statues. You'll occasionally see these come up for sale. Sometimes they were given just to members of Industrial Light and Magic, other times for all of Lucasfilm. There are a couple versions of this Yoda statue that have been, there's one in this kind of green color, there's also a gold toned one. Now, as they let different departments do their own, wear for the crew items, you have examples like documentary crew. I mean, I don't know how many people were in the documentary crew, but I can't imagine it's very many. I would guess like under 20 people who are documenting the making of Revenge of the Sith. So they had their own set of t-shirts. The plaster crew, so the people working in plaster for the sets and so on, they had their own set of t-shirts, and they let each unit design their crew items. So they're all kind of customized for each unit. So trying to find these things gets really tough because there's so many different ones. There's so few people that have these things. And so you're trying to really network with a wide range of people who worked on the movies. The art department, I like the Puma art department track jackets are really nice. So you can see the styles of these really contrast to the plaster department and the creature shop ones you saw in the previous slide. So for Clone Wars, they started to kind of play around with a whole bunch of different images. Like the one on the left is a Rocketeer-styled clone trooper. They also have the kind of cartoon versions of Yoda and Mace Windu. So they continue the tradition even through the Clone Wars as they're working on cartoons. And presumably we'll see some stuff coming up for Rebels and of course when Episode 7 comes out. Clone Wars, they also did lunchboxes, 2 different styles of lunchboxes only given to crew members. I mean, these probably would have been very popular had they been made available to the public, but they were kind of old-style metal lunchboxes that were given out at various screenings and events. Also for Clone Wars, they did some unique things like the chopsticks that you see on the top. That was from SIGGRAPH conference that was held in Singapore that year. And so to kind of make it Asian themed, they made Star Wars branded chopsticks for Clone Wars that they gave out at that event. On the lower left, you'll see the invitations and lanyards and badges for crew screenings of Clone Wars, and other things like the gingerbread kind of ginger clone Christmas card. They also Clone Wars ended up being themed for the Christmas cards for Lucasfilm that year. Star Tours as well. Various crew items they made for Star Tours. So when they refurbished the ride a couple years ago, it was like 2011. They made a fleece jacket, t-shirt, a cap, and so because there were a bunch of people at Industrial Light and Magic that were working on the new special effects for Star Tours. And so for those of you who have not seen the new Star Tours ride, I highly encourage it. It's an amazing ride. What they redid the old Disney ride, now they have it where it has a random sequence, and I forgot the number of combinations, something like 64 combinations of the ride, but particularly like the Hoth AT-AT battle is amazing what they did for Star Tours. So they had a lot of work on special effects for it and made crew items for that. Here are some examples of other holiday cards that Lucasfilm issued, like the Jawas in the upper left was a Ralph McQuarrie design. You'll see kind of in the right, the kind of Golden Gate Bridge. This is from, like we saw earlier, the moving card with the Sandcrawler and the Land Speeder when they were moving offices in Southern California. This is when they were moving from Skywalker Ranch to the Presidio in San Francisco. So they used that same kind of style, to parody that years later. One of my favorites is the Death Star ornament. I believe that's a LucasArts card, so kind of one of the more obscure cards. And then you see Jabba as Santa or Jabba as a snowman. So they've done different Jabba-themed cards as well. So they continue to this day. In recent years, almost every year of Lucasfilm cards have been Star Wars themed over the last 15 years. Now also for some of the Lucas companies, this starts to get into an area where is it really a crew item, but these are still items exclusive to the Lucas companies. So Lucasfilm has their own fire department on Skywalker Ranch. So, because it's an area that is very arid, you can get wildfires very easily. It's a vineyard, so that kind of climate, you have to be very careful about fire risk. And so Lucasfilm has their own fire department, their own fire trucks, and so they actually make a whole bunch of stuff for the Lucasfilm Fire Department, the Skywalker Ranch Fire Department. So they have this flask and t-shirt, caps, mugs. They've actually made, you know, a few dozen different things for the Skywalker Ranch Fire Department. And then even more obscure is this Martinez Electric Company. So the power company that provides power to Skywalker Ranch actually made their own T-shirt, you know, kind of bragging about, hey, we're the guys that supply power to Lucasfilm at Skywalker Ranch. So even really obscure kind of companies that work with Lucasfilm have done their own crew stuff. Jabba the Hutt is a barista in the Presidio building. So they have, the coffee's not very good, but it's kind of cool, the Jabba the Hutt themed coffee there. So they've done different T-shirts, caps, mugs, and if you ever get into the Presidio, if you're fortunate enough to visit a member of the company, you can take you by there, and they have some various kind of you know, Jabba and coffee themed stuff on display there. For the different parties that continued with other kind of parodies and interesting designs, so you have, you know, kind of Leia as a vampire from one of the Halloween parties. You know, on the lower left you have Yoda as the Exorcist, so it's the F-Exorcist, another film parody they did for the Halloween party. They've done the Jack-o'-lantern, 3PO, and Vader, so continued along those themes of, you know, kind of really clever Halloween party invites. Other parties and events include, like, so Lucas Palooza was kind of a concert kind of party event. They had an Industrial Light and Magic, and so here they took the Tusken Raiders, and you notice they've replaced gaffy sticks with various guitars and other instruments. They also did another party where they had the kind of Miko single, Star Wars disco-themed single, we replaced it with kind of a bantha for the RSO label, so those were kind of given out as gifts at the party. The one on the left is one of the early parties in the mid-'80s, where they did this R2 kind of flyer to advertise the party. Now, one question you may have is, where do you acquire these things? I mean, how can you find these things? And there are a few places the crew items do turn up. You know, as we've seen, there's hundreds of these things out there, hundreds of different things, limited in number, but there are enough that they do get in circulation. You can check on eBay. So they're always, at any time on eBay, there'll be various crew items for sale. People who work on the movies will list things on eBay, or there'll be a secondary market. Dealers who stockpile these things will sell on eBay. A number of things have also gotten in circulation from Gary Kurtz's stock. So when Gary worked on you know, Empire Strikes Back and A New Hope, he had this just surplus of these, particularly Empire Strikes Back era stuff, that then got sold off to various dealers. So you'll see that things like the passport for Empire Strikes Back, or some of the coasters, those kinds of things, got in circulation from supplies that Kurtz had. Various prop dealers, so the companies that specialize in getting movie props, when they're contacting all these kind of cast and crew members to get props and costumes from the films. In the process, they also pick up a lot of crew items. So if you go to Prop Store, Prop Masters, or Screen Use, those are good companies, very reliable, trustworthy companies, and they have a lot of crew items at any time. If you check those websites right now, you'll find crew items up there from Star Wars. Of course, if you know people who worked on the movies, on the crew or actors in the films, they have a lot of these items. Many of them, of course, like to keep them for sentimental reasons, but over time they acquired quite a few of those, and those get into circulation that way as well. But one thing for people who want to get into this, the best thing you can do is network. Find out people who collect this stuff, people who work on movies. That's the best way to find these things. Get an idea of what to pay. On the low end, some of these things are actually fairly cheap. I mean, in US dollars, some of them are in the kind of $10 to $20 range, which is not that expensive for something so rare and limited. I think a lot of people have a perception this stuff has to be really expensive. And actually, the majority of these things are under 100 US, and usually in the tens of dollars range. But there are some high-end pieces, like Norway parkas, those that I showed earlier, those go for thousands of dollars, and very few of them ever get sold. So there's just intense demand for them. The album we looked through there, where they had the different black and white stills and they're personalized to crew members, those usually go for a couple $1,000s because they're pretty rare. But those are the exceptions. Most items are a lot cheaper. And as you would expect, the vintage pieces are a bit more than the prequel pieces. So a lot of the prequel items are more available. They made way more of them. The crews are a lot larger. People are smart about saving things nowadays, where they weren't so much back in the day. So you'd expect that the vintage stuff is a bit more valuable generally. So I love the cast and crew stuff so much that we actually have a room in our house devoted just to cast and crew items. And so this is just a sampling of some of the stuff on display, but I have like the Christmas cards and the patches and then the Norway suit, various t-shirts all on display in a room. And when I give people tours of our house and we go through it, they're like, wow, this is really cool, you got all these t-shirts here. I'm like, well, yeah, actually this is all crew items, and in the room is just hundreds of items. That even if you go deep in this area, there's so much stuff that they've made for the crew. One of my favorite pieces is the C-3PO Oscar you see on the right. What they did, for every employee of Lucasfilm that hits their 20th anniversary, they give them like an Oscar Academy Award statue, but with C-3PO on it, to commemorate their 20th anniversary with the company. So you can imagine how many people have stayed at Lucasfilm for 20 years and then also want to part with this thing. So those are one of the toughest crew items, but it's one of the ones that like the crew collectors are just really hot to find, because there aren't that many people that have hit a 20th anniversary at the company. The company actually hasn't even been around all that long, so it's pretty tough to find them. If you want to learn more, Duncan and I co-authored a book on Star Wars cast and crew items. You can find it, on all the different Amazon sites, and it covers some of the highlights of what we covered today and a little bit more background on the subject. But yeah, I didn't bring copies here to Jedi-Con, but you can order online anytime to get the book. So with there, I'll conclude. So thank you very much. So I think we have time for a couple of questions. So any questions on any of this material?
Yeah, we've seen so various articles and items. Do you know if there was a kind of approval process also in existence from Lucasfilm?
Yeah, so the question about an approval process from Lucasfilm. Yeah, I think from what I've seen from talking to people is the approval process varied by film and varied depending on the item. So certainly for things like film logos and all that, that's centrally approved. And for some of the early films, a lot of the crew items there was usually one person or a few people really on all of the items for the crew, because they issued pretty much the same stuff for everybody. It got a little bit more decentralized when they got into the prequels, where they had different departments. But my understanding from talking to people is they still had to centrally approve all of the stuff that they gave to the crew members. Even though they had all these different departments designing their own, there still had to be some checks and balances. But a lot of the items shown here, I'm pretty sure never got actually approved by anybody. I mean, some of these things, it's just a small group of people working on the film go make it, and then it's more like it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. So there's some examples of that where I'm pretty sure that there was no approval process when they did it. Other questions? Sorry, detours? Sorry, what was the question? Star Wars detours. Yeah, Star Wars detours? Yeah, I haven't seen any items surface from that. Well, it would be natural that you would see items for it. So yeah, if I hear of any, I will certainly be going after them. But I've not heard of any items come from that. Great. Okay, so oh wait, one more question. Yeah, over there.
Did you ask Anthony Daniels to get his episode 7 hat?
Question was to get Anthony Daniels' episode 7 hat. No, but that's a great idea. I'll have to ask him. Yeah, I haven't seen, episode 7 items haven't really started surfacing yet. So I think, they're still obviously filming. They're going to be filming through the fall. So, and there probably are items that won't get issued until the coming year anyway. So yeah, but usually you'll start to see them surface just a couple months before the film. They'll start to kind of come up. Great. So with that, we'll conclude. So thank you very much.